You're listening to Beyond Technique, the podcast that empowers photographers to bring their businesses to the next level. Hello and welcome to Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platapod, Photofocus, and Cohen University. This is Shamir Young, and I'm joined by my co-host, Skip Cohen. Skip.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, life is good. I have to tell you, and everybody is feeling this to a degree. Mm-hmm. Getting back to some level of normal is just a fun thing. I mean, being able to go out to dinner with friends, being able to actually shake somebody's hand, even if you do run over to the sanitizing soap immediately afterwards, it's just a nice thing. Yeah. And along with that, it's just fun today. Because today's guest only lives a couple hours from me, so at some point I'm going to catch up to him live. We've got Aaron Van in the Beyond Technique house, and he's got the ideal background for being a well-respected food photographer. So first of all, he's an admitted foodie. His passion for food and creating images his clients, Crave, launched a whole new direction in his career, and we're going to talk about that. He's an artist, he's a photographer. I mentioned already he's a foodie, he's an educator, and in fact, Kelby One just released Aaron's new online class not too long ago. Now, the fun of this industry, and I've talked about it before, are the friendships that come out of everyone's love for the craft. And we all share that love for the craft, and including with Aaron is food. And he recently shot a terrific video for Platapod, which will air in the next few days. And that's how Aaron and I met. So we're going to talk about Aaron's journey into stunning food photography, the importance of being a perpetual student, relationship building, and especially understanding what makes the subject of a photograph craveable. I love that word, which he uses in his bio. In fact, on his website is one sentence that I loved, quote, "There is nothing quite like walking into a shoot, throwing on some music, setting up the lights, and preparing to tell another craveable story of food for my clients," close quote. So that passion that you hear in that sentence is definitely going to come out today in terms of his love for photography and food in today's podcast. It's going to be loud and clear. So, Aaron, here we go with my usual line. This is the cue for your lips to move. Welcome to Beyond Technique.
Thank you very much, Skip and Shamir. I'm happy to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I look forward to the conversation for sure.
Well, be careful what you wish for, because you've got two foodies on this call with you today.
I was going to say,
Aaron,
I'm
in good company.
My mouth is literally watering looking at the images on your website. I mean, it's so impressive. And your client list as well. I mean, equally impressive. And we'd love to kick it off with our favorite first question, just so our listeners can get to know you a little better. Tell us about your journey as a photographer. Talk about your background and how you ended up doing what you're doing today.
Sure. Thank you, Shamir. So I started I think a lot of photographers started with a relative. It was actually my grandfather that gave me my first camera. It was a film camera when I was just a child, and the idea of capturing an image was definitely interesting to me. I played with it a lot when I was a kid. And then growing up, I grew up in Massachusetts, in Georgetown, just north of Boston. And we had a neighbor friend who was a friend of the family, and he was actually a National Geographic photographer and well-respected art photographer these days. And so being kind of in that photography that young, I kind of got exposed to it a little bit, and I had a love for the idea of it. As I went on, I was in high school, and I took photography classes in school, and then I ended up becoming the head photographer for my yearbook and newspaper staff, and I did that for 4 years. And I absolutely loved the process and working with people and shooting all those images throughout that part. But when I went to college, when I got ready to go to college, the question was, do I go to college for photography? And at the time, I was very into computers, and I was really starting to get into design in general. And computer, digital media, and graphic design was really just starting to become a thing. And when I was graduating, going to college, the college that I went to was they had just started a digital media program, and I ended up being in the second class through it. So we learned about we learned everything about digital media as a whole, whether it was audio production, video production, 3D design, Photoshop, Illustrator, graphic design, etc. And so when I graduated, I got my first job in advertising. I was working out of Fort Lauderdale, and my first job walking into this ad agency, they assigned me with designing the kids club section of the Burger King website. And I did that for a few years, and I really loved commercial advertising. And so I spent the first 20 years of my career working in advertising and working for larger Fortune 500 companies, designing ads, and then also doing a lot of back-end development and design and doing user interface, user interaction type design with a very heavy emphasis on branding. And one of the jobs that I had along the way was working for a restaurant design firm, and I was the art director there. And we did logo design, we did menu design, and we did photography. And we would work with other photographers to create some of this food photography. And that job was definitely one of the highlights of my advertising career, and I just loved all the aspects of it. And over the years, being in design and being in advertising, there's always been that love for photography, and I always wanted to make it a career, but it was always hard to jump over to that side of things, especially considering photography is in itself, and it can be difficult to find positions working for somebody. You really have to take a lot of that on your own and build that yourself. So I didn't have a lot of opportunities to do that. Fast forward to 6 years ago now, and with all of my love for recipe development and food, I ended up winning a food competition, a recipe competition, and the prize was a trip to Ireland for a week to study with Chef Kevin Dundon in Ireland. And I took my camera with me. Obviously, I love photography, and it was just me. It wasn't the family. And took my camera with me, and I spent the entire week just doing nothing but photographing food and having all these food experiences. And I came back and I was like, that's what I want to do. I never wanted to get into commercial photography, doing fashion or shooting sunglasses or chainsaws for catalogs and whatnot. But I always knew I wanted to be in commercial photography in some way. And for some reason, the connection between food and commercial photography didn't really come about until that trip. So I came back from that, and immediately I started building my portfolio. And I'm 6 years in. Took me about 3 years working my full-time job while I was building my food and beverage portfolio before I was able to switch out and replace my full-time income and support my family with my work. And for the past 3.5 years now, I've been working myself full-time. And then just as the pandemic hit, I was right in the middle of opening up a studio and doing getting all that together. And it was very much do I pull the trigger on this or do I wait? And I decided to go ahead with it, opened up a studio the very first month of the pandemic while all of my clients were calling and canceling. Mm-hmm. And it turns out it was like the best decision. And so here I am today.
Wow. What's that old line about leap and the net will appear?
Yeah.
That's the best example. I know when I left WPPI in 2009, everybody thought I was insane. We were in a recession, and in my case, I just wanted to know if I'd learned enough in my life that I could actually walk the talk. I mean, I'm out there teaching marketing, and then all of a sudden I decide that I'm going to start my own business. And when the smoke clears, you sit there and you look back and you say, why didn't I do that sooner? And yet you couldn't have done it sooner because you weren't necessarily ready for it. In fact, in terms of when you did do it, one of the things that I noticed when I looked at all your images, and Shamir made a comment about your portfolio online, and I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of everything you photographed. What are some of the ingredients that you work with when you've got some students or just other photographers whose work you're looking at? What are some of the ingredients that photographers tend to miss that make that image craveable?
Well, my background in advertising has definitely helped to form and shape my eye and my take on food photography. Also, my background in advertising has helped me to work with my clients and work with ad agencies and understanding what they need, what they want, what their deliverables are. As far as the look and feel of an image and what I'm, one of the things that I think makes a big difference is that you can take a photograph of food with some decent light and be done. Like you can put a camera over a good looking dish with some decent light on it and have a good photograph. But I think what makes a great photograph is the details, and it's in those details, it's in those millimeters of movements, it's in making sure that there's no tangents visible in a shot. It's the psychology of how an eye moves through a photograph and the composition that photographers in general really need to know and understand and learn over time. There's such a psychological element to how the mind moves through an image. And I think that one of the things that is the thing that pushes an image to the next level is knowing those things and getting it right in the image to a point where somebody would look at that and not know that it was wrong in the first place. It just all works. It just all comes together, your eye flows through it so effortlessly that the craveability of the food that you're photographing comes through effortlessly.
That's
and
super
it does
interesting.
in your images.
Well, thank you. It's something I've worked very hard at, for sure.
And, this really touches on the point. We had such an interesting pre-interview chat, and there was a line that you said, and I somewhat jotted it down, but tell me if I butcher it. But you were talking about the difference between a food photographer versus someone who just takes pictures of food.
Yes. I think there's lots. I mean, when you think about food photography, everybody that takes a camera out and takes a picture of food could essentially call themselves a food photographer. But I do think that there is a difference between somebody who points a camera at a plate of food or at a scene of food and clicks a shutter, and a food photographer who goes through and understands the lighting of a scene and how that light tells the story of the food, and the positioning of objects and the composition of the scene and how the eye moves through, and all those little details that are the steps to becoming a food photographer. It would be like somebody starting out as an RN and then learning, how to be a brain surgeon. There's so many things in between that you have to learn to get to that level. And I do believe that there is a curve, and there's an education that has to happen to get to the point where, you would be a food photographer and not somebody that just takes pictures of food.
I love how you phrase that. That's so interesting. And, as you're talking, I mean, your years of experience in not just photography, but brand building and working with businesses, I mean, it all comes through in the way that you talk about what you do. And I'm really curious. Now, I think you said when you were talking about your journey into becoming a full-time food photographer that it took you, was it 6 years before you could...
It was 3 years before I could replace my income and do it full time. But it's been 6 years from the time that I made the decision to be a commercial food photographer to where I am now with the client roster, the portfolio, and the studio and all that.
And that is impressive. So 3 years to replace your income, that very important first step, especially when you have a family to support. I would love for you to kind of talk about the role of relationship building as you built your business and as you moved towards becoming full-time, because there are a lot of components in there that I think photographers would find useful.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a really fun story to this, actually, that not a lot of people know. It's not something that I, like write in my bio or anything. But when I first started, it was literally like a month after I had made this decision that this is what I want to do. And I had to sit down and figure out, okay, so what are the first steps? And, the very first step to me, after deciding the genre that I wanted to focus on, and I think it's very important for successful commercial photographers or successful photographers that are in business to find that genre and hone in on it, because you can be a jack of trades at everything, and photographers typically do that. But I think that I feel very strongly that to be successful in the business, you have to find that one thing that you're great at and go after that and be that person for your clients. If you want to photograph everything, you can do a lot of it as hobby, and I do that as well. But to be successful in business, you have to really focus. So after figuring out what that focus was and knowing that food and beverage was what I wanted to photograph and what I wanted to make a career, the next step was building that portfolio. And so I simply reached out to local restaurants, and I started calling on especially newer restaurants that were just getting started, and especially restaurants that I really loved their menu and I loved their branding and what they were doing. And I would reach out to them and I would say, hey, could I come out and photograph some of your food? If you make some food to put in front of my camera and let me practice on it, I'll give you the images and you can use them for your marketing. And there was one company in particular that responded and was, very welcoming and was like, we'd love to have you out. And I was out there at their restaurant shooting a dish on the bar before business hours, but they were open, they were getting ready for business. And this gentleman happened to be walking around it was in downtown Orlando. And this gentleman happened to be walking around with his son. I think this was on a Saturday afternoon because of a lot of this I had to do after hours from my full-time job in advertising. And he walked by the door and he looked over and he happened to see, he was like, oh, you're a food photographer. And of course, here I am a month in, and he said, do you have a business card? And I said, no, I don't. I am a food photographer, fake it till you make it. Right. But I said, here's my, if there's anything that I can help you with, please reach out. So it was about 3 or 4 weeks later. I hadn't heard anything, but I ended up getting an email from him, and he said, hey, we met, and I'm the VP of marketing for a couple of restaurants you may know. And he ran off Morimoto Asia at Disney Springs, as well as all the Italian restaurants at Epcot. And I'm a big Disney person in the first place. We've had annual passes for the past, I think it's going on 20 years now, my wife and I, and for the family. And so I'm already a big Disney person, and here's this guy saying, yeah, I'm the VP of marketing for these restaurants, and we'd love to, talk to you about doing some photography. So that was actually for the Patina Restaurant Group, and they now have 10 properties out at Disney, and I have opened four or five of their restaurants for them out there. I've shot for them in New York City. I've shot for the other various properties. I've done studio shoots for them for their network of, I think they have about 50 different restaurants around the country. And they were my first client, and they have been my client ever since. And that was how I really got my start. That a lot of people talk about like it's, you'll be successful because it's who you know. And I like to take a bit of a spin on that, because I do agree that in the networking, it is so important to make these connections. And I think that the success does happen from who you know, but I put myself in that situation. I put myself out there to do that work, and I happened to be there when that guy walked by. And so I did the work to get to the who I know. And I think that anybody who's interested in pushing themselves and building a business can do the same. They can put themselves in those situations that's going to create an environment to meet the people that they need to know, make those connections, and then build from there, because that connection has certainly helped me over the years create other connections, and it continues to this day.
There's a great book out there, and you could have written it. It's by Scott Stratton. It's called Unmarketing.
Yeah.
And the tagline or the subtitle is Stop Marketing and Start Engaging, because relationship building is absolutely every business owner's, not just in photography, but every business owner's best marketing brand building tool is relationship building.
100%.
I mean, and you never know. I mean, this goes back to people you meet on planes, elevators, wherever. We all laugh about going to conventions and often being at the same rubber chicken dinners. And then you find out that the person that you happen to have met at one of those programs happens to have an asset in their skill set that you don't have, and that's where all those relationships keep playing out. So, sorry, that was kind of a useless tidbit, everybody, but
No, absolutely, it's 100%.
yeah, I love the backstory. Hey, I want to do something a little different because we don't normally talk specifically about products because we don't want a podcast to be like an infomercial. But it is fun for me because the way you and I met, and Shamara hasn't seen, I don't think Shamara's seen your video yet on food photography, but we met because of your work with Platapod. And both
Yep.
Shamara and I are involved with Platapod, and Platapod sponsors this podcast. What is there about working with the Platapod that you feel is an asset in terms of being a food photographer?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that it's always good when a tool that's out there for one purpose can have so many different purposes, and sometimes those purposes are not even necessarily known. I use the Platapod in a different way. I do use it to get my lights really low for a background. I do use it to get my camera, in an interesting position for my shots. There are times that I'm working on set or at a location where I have a shot frame in mind that I just can't get a tripod to, and so my Platapod definitely helps in those scenarios. But one of the ways that I use it most is on set in the studio when I'm working on a scene. I need a lot of extra hands. Like, sometimes I feel like I'd be helpful if I was an octopus and I had multiple hands. Because I'm bouncing, a lot of my work is like one light, maybe two lights, typically, and a lot of the times, and you light food from the back because food has so much depth and dimension that you need the highlight and shadow to be able to really give the dimension to the subject. If you light food from the front, you just flatten it out. So it's always being lit from the back, which means if the part of your subject or the part of your food that you're trying to highlight is on the opposite side of that light, then you need to be able to get some light back into that. I've studied lighting over the years through portraiture and through advertising lighting and all that, and I've really, I've always had a love for the lighting, and I've always loved the technicality of it and the detail of it, and so lighting has always been a big part of my food photography. It's not just throwing a light on a scene; it's about building lighting for the scene. And so a lot of the times I'm using mirrors, or I'm using small bounce cards, or I'm using black cards that'll cut some light here and there. And not only do I need to get those into position in the right place that's not in the view of the camera, but I also need to get them in close to the food so that they have the right connection to the food. And if I had all of those on stands around my set, not only would they not be able to get in the right position, but I'd also wouldn't be able to get into my set because I'd have flags everywhere. So the Platypods, I use the gooseneck arms, and I've mounted mirrors onto the gooseneck arms and mounted clips and things like that. And that Platypod can sit right on my set. It can move right up towards my subject, stay just out of frame, and get that light exactly where I need it to create the image and tell the story that I'm trying to tell. So it's been really great how flexible they have been, and then the other thing is that I love that when I'm just going out to, say, Disney with my family, I grab one of the Platypods and throw it in my bag because I know I want an interesting angle for my personal shots too. So it's nice that it's multifaceted and can be used in so many ways.
How long have you been using your Platypod?
I was actually introduced to them not all that long ago. I was looking for a solution to that problem, and Platapod became that solution. I had looked at a couple of different products that I could bring into the studio to solve that, and then when I found the Platapod, it was the perfect fit to the problem that I had. And typically, you don't really know what you need until you need it. And it was a great fit, and I've just loved, after using it for that to solve that one problem, I have also just loved how many other ways I can use it, because the more ways you can use something that you bring into your studio, the more value it has, and so that's been great.
Love it. And as you were talking, I found your dessert page, your sweets page on your website, which I had not previously. Oh my goodness. But I see everything you're talking about with the placement of the lighting and the composition and how all those pieces come into play where you're telling a story and directing the viewer's eye. I love your attention to detail in your images. And I'm curious, as you've been shooting over the years, who are some of the photographers who have influenced your work? Does anyone come to mind?
Yeah, I think one of the first ones, the big one that comes to mind would be Wanacott. It's funny, I've always called him by Wanacott, and I don't even know if I know his first name. But Wanacott.com is he's a drink photographer. He's focused on drinks over the years, and he does a little bit with food, but primarily he's a cocktail photographer, and he's like the guy that I want to be when I grow up. So, but other than that, there's a company, an agency called Broughton Straub. Mm-hmm. Broughton Straub is an agency. Again, I don't really know who the primary photographer there is, but the look that they give their imagery has always, I've always looked to them for inspiration. And then also Terry Campbell. Terry Campbell is a food and beverage photographer. He's in Ohio, and when I first got started and I first started looking around to find inspiration and to find people that I really enjoyed their work, and I actually reached out to him on Facebook, and he was kind enough to respond back and give me some tips and some pointers. And he's trying to run a business at the same time, and giving away some of his secrets. And but I always said, it's like when I was doing that, I always said, I know there's no way that I can ever repay this guy for taking that time and for doing that for me. But the one way that I've always said that I was going to repay everybody who took the time to have some of those conversations with me, look over my work, give me some review and some feedback, etc., and support me, was to say that just to pay it forward and just to be there and available when other people come knocking on my door with the same questions. So but Terry Campbell was a great start to figuring out some of the direction that I needed. And I always reference back to his imagery because his work is phenomenal.
Do you have a particular food that you love to photograph most? I know that's like somebody asking a Hollywood celebrity what their favorite color is, but is there some particular cuisine that you just enjoy photographing, or drinks or anything else?
I would have to say it's cocktails. As far as cuisine, I love sweets. Not just, I love photographing sweets because I think that with sweets and cocktails, it's a similar reason, and the main reason being that you can go that extra step with telling the story of it. You can get a little bit outrageous. You can get a little bit loud. You can be a little bit more creative. There's a lot of different ways you can photograph a burger, but at the end of the day, it's a burger. But when I'm photographing like a pile of brownies with ice cream on top, and I've got those sexy drips of chocolate coming down, and I can get creative with, a little bite out of it, or I can have a spoon on the side, the interaction with it, or with the cocktails where you can have, ice strewn about, and you can have a splash, and you can have, I look for those moments, and I think that cocktail photography and sweets are definitely the areas where you can kind of go that extra mile and really get loud and have some fun with it. So I absolutely love doing those.
Have you ever had a client say, what happened to the chocolate cake that you were supposed to photograph?
Well, the good thing about being a food photographer is that you usually have like 3 or 4 chocolate cakes on set. We just had that situation recently where I was shooting for a client in the studio, and they're adding a new cake to their menu, and we had like 4 of them on set. And we do that because you need that hero piece, and it's not always guaranteed that you're going to get it from one. So you want to make sure you have plenty of backup. But the nice thing about that is that once the shot is in the can and it's all done, there's 3 cakes left over usually that we can all split up, and everybody gets dessert in the studio.
So great.
Well,
oh my goodness.
I like that. Hey, we're just about out of time, and Shamara's got her favorite last question. Before Shamara jumps on that last question, just let's share with our listeners what's in the Kelby One class that just recently aired and is available now.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. It's one of my first. I would say my Platapod class would probably be like one of my first classes. This has been my first class on an education platform, and so I love to be able to share about that. So what we did was lighting for food photography, and the course covers studio lighting, but the way that I wanted to approach the subject was to explain lighting in general, whether it's coming from a natural light source or it's coming from a studio light source. Light is light. And as long as you understand how the light behaves and what it can do to a scene, then you can learn how to modify it to tell your own story. And so I really focused on setting up, on getting into the details about how lenses and depth of field and lens compression and focus and all of that plays into a scene. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't creating a course that was just like, okay, here's a pizza and this is how you light a pizza. Throughout the course, we created scenes to light so that we had subject matter. But we took this approach throughout the course where the first scene was a pastry scene, and we started with just one light, and then we modified that light and crafted it for our scene to tell the correct story for that scene. Then we cleared that scene and we put a bright breakfast scene with a bowl of yogurt and some berries, really beautiful scene. We put that into that pastry scene and we didn't change anything about the lighting, and we shot that. And then from there, as a base, we said, okay, this is what it looked like with this scene. This is what the same exact lighting, same settings, everything looks like with this new food. Now, what do we need to do to modify the light to tell the story of this food? And so I feel like this lighting for food photography course was really to get to deliver the information that people would need to know about lighting and food or small tabletop product photography in general, that could then let them go and craft their own images and create their own style from that knowledge. That's what I focused on in it, and I hope I got that across. I had a chance to watch it, and I think that it was successful in it. And when the guys that are filming me, say, "Man, we're learning so much," I took that as a good sign that I think I was getting some good information across. So it's for my first one, I think it's a great program, and I look back at what I've learned over the last 6 years about food photography in general and lighting for food photography, and I put that course together in a way that I would have wanted to learn it from the get-go, because I've had to pull all this information from so many different sources and trial and error and play with it and figure out what works and why. And so I wanted to put that back out in kind of that recipe that I've figured out that makes the most difference in how I tell my stories with light and food.
Well, to me, whether you're interested in being a food photographer or, for that matter, you're a wedding and event photographer, expanding that skill set and understanding what goes into the lighting of food in a workshop class like yours online. And as we go forward in the future and things get back to normal, I'm sure you're going to be doing some stuff live as well. I mean, it just gives you a chance to raise the bar on the quality of images you're creating for your clients. And there's no reason that a piece of wedding cake can't look just as stunning as some of your portfolio images if you think about what it takes to light it and be a food photographer, not just somebody photographing food. So there's my closing pitch. But Shamara, you've always got a favorite last question.
I do, and I'm always sad when we get to our last question, because that means we're wrapping up the interview. And Aaron, I'm pretty sure I could listen to you talk all day. I mean, just the way that you articulate the components that go into food photography, it's really fascinating. And so, and the irony of our last question is that it's asking so we'd like to know any advice you have for photographers just starting out, even though I feel like this entire episode has been just advice, great advice after great advice. So is there anything else you can think of that you would tell a photographer who's just starting out during these interesting times? What would you say to them?
Yeah, looking back at over the years and looking back at the course of creating this specific business, the one of the things that the first thing that I tell people is that it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of patience. Patience, I think, is one of the things that a lot of people that are getting into this think that, oh, I can pick up a camera and I can start taking pictures and I can start charging clients and off I go. But I think that in order to get, if you are really passionate about photography and you're really passionate about the subject that you want to photograph and you want to create those images, one of the things that I looked at when I first got started is I looked at the work that was out there and I said, if that work can be created, there's no reason I can't create it. I know that with the right time, the right education, the right learning, finding all the pieces and parts that I need, connecting, networking, etc., there's no reason that anybody that goes after it can't do it. But to understand that it takes time, it's going to take successes and failures. I remember back when one of the first conversations that I had with a larger brand, and there was no reason I should have been having that conversation, but at that time in this growth, and but I look back at it now, and it was one of those things where it's like, that had to happen. That was one of the first things that pushed me to learn more about the business of commercial photography and the level that I want is a different market than, if you're working with a national restaurant chain or a large food brand is a very different process than working with a local restaurant. And so those are things that you have to learn. And so throughout it's not just about the photography. I think a lot of photographers say this, a lot of the professional photographers will tell you that 20% of it is the photography and 80% of it is business. You have to be prepared for the fact that you are owning and running a business, and you have to be willing to put the education into that just as much as you are into the photography. So if you want photography to just be a passion and just be a hobby, then I say do that. Don't worry about, making a living at it. But if you really want it to be a career, I think that for anybody that's going to approach it, that it's possible. I think that anybody can do it. I just think that you have to start at the beginning knowing that it's going to be a process. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work, and you have to be patient and let it happen over the course of the years that you'll be building it. One of the things that I was told very early on, and I can't remember who said it, but it has stuck with me these years because it was told to me very early, is that they had said it takes 3 to 5 years to build a successful business where you can be doing the work you want to be doing and making an income at it. So 3 to 5 years to build a successful business. It takes another 3 to 5 years to be at the level that you'd want to be at the top of the game. I'm 6 years in. I feel like that has held true. 3 to 5 years, I'd say right about 3.5, 4 years was when I was able to get out and do this full time. I am not anywhere near where I want to be. I know that it's going to take a few more years of hard work and networking and connections and clients, and it will go one step at a time. I'm looking forward to the rest of the journey, and I hope that I can make it to where I want to be. But again, just knowing that there are people at that level means that it's possible, and there's no reason why it can't be possible for me too.
Great answer.
Perfect. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Wow. Good stuff.
I'm kind of speechless right now. And we do want to make sure and ask Aaron, where can folks find you online to check out your work?
Yeah, my website is www.aaronvan.com. I'm on Instagram at aaronvanphoto. I am working on adding my portfolio to foundartists.com, which will pretty much mimic my main website. And I'm actually a part of a group out of Cincinnati, Ohio called OMS Photo. And if you look at omsphoto.com, you'll find my work on there as well. They are a photography studio up there that has taken on some other people in other places, and we kind of work as a unit on larger commercial jobs. They have in-house retouching and production that has been a great resource. And I'm kind of their southeastern United States arm. So you can check out some of their work, and they do some really awesome work for some big brands out there. And so, yeah.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to include those in the show notes so that people can check that out. And
Sure.
Skip, where can folks find you online?
It's always the same answer. Everything I write is at skipcohenuniversity.com. My email is skip@mei500.com. We'd love to get feedback from you and suggestions. And if you've got a request on a topic or somebody you think we ought to have as a guest, let us know. I'm also Skip Cohen on Facebook and on Twitter. And as I always ask that same question, Shamira, where do they go to find you?
Yes, folks can send me an email at shamira@photofocus.com. That's my first name, CHAMIRA, @photofocus.com. We love getting questions, ideas, feedback, so do email us because it shapes how we move forward with the show. And Aaron, we just want to thank you again. This conversation was it was amazing. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Just a lot of good insight that you shared today.
Thank you all for having me. Like I said, this is I'm really enjoying having these conversations. You know, as you all know, it's fun to just sit down and talk shop. And I'm always here for anybody who has questions about this. Feel free to reach out. Like I said, I'm paying it forward. So I'm glad to have been invited, and thank you all for the awesome questions.
Yeah, the only comment I have is that in the future, this conversation needs to take place over a decent meal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. With a halfway decent, it doesn't even have to be a great wine, just a halfway decent bottle.
Well, you make your way up here, Skip, and I'll take you out to some of my clients and treat you to
based on what you said, be careful what you wish for. Hey, everybody, we're doing Thanksgiving at Aaron's.
Oh, my goodness.
Just great stuff today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I love it. Love it. And we want to thank our listeners for joining us as well. Please tell your friends about this podcast, especially if they want to improve their photography business and bring it up to the next level. We look forward to having you all with us next time on Beyond Technique, brought to you by Platapod, Photofocus, and Skip Cohen University.